The day started with shouting, not the kind you hear at a football game, but the kind that makes your stomach twist. "Sir, that waterway belongs to the HOA now." That's what Karen, our new HOA president, screamed across the old wooden fence, her sunglasses flashing like daggers in the morning sun. I froze right there, holding my coffee mug on the porch. The creek she was pointing at wasn't just a waterway. It was our creek, the one my grandfather dug out with his own hands back in 1957. When this land was nothing but pine trees and promise, I grew up wading through that shallow stream, catching tadpoles and skipping stones while my dad whittled wood by the fire pit. Every ripple in that water carried a memory: family picnics, summer laughter. My dad teaching me how to fly-fish. So when that HOA woman said it belonged to them, I laughed at first. I thought it was a misunderstanding. But Karen didn't blink. She had a clipboard tucked under her arm and a smugness that could peel paint. According to new zoning updates, she said the creek is within our community's drainage easement. It's now HOA-maintained property. I stepped off the porch slowly, my boots sinking into the damp grass. "That's funny," I said, "because last I checked, my family deed says otherwise." Karen smirked. "Oh, those old papers. Outdated. You'll need to remove that dock too. It's an unauthorized structure." That dock wasn't just a plank of wood. My father built it the year he died as his final gift to me. His initials RD were still carved into the beam. I swear I could feel his spirit hovering there every time I stood on it by noon. 3 HOA board members had shown up, all in matching polos, clipboards in hand, talking about community uniformity. They walked my property line like vultures circling a carcass. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Kids stopped their bikes at the edge of my yard. That's how small-town rumors start, with whispers behind windows. When the HOA lawyer emailed me later that evening, the subject line read, "Unauthorized occupation of common waterway." I sat there staring at the screen, my hands shaking. Occupation? That creek had been in my family longer than the entire subdivision had existed. The HOA was barely 15 years old. I called my sister Lila, who lived 3 towns over. She answered right away. "What's wrong, Jack? You sound like you saw a ghost." "Worse," I said. I saw Karen with a clipboard. Lila went quiet for a moment, then sighed. "They're after the creek, aren't they?" "Yeah. Dad always said they'd come for it someday." That night I sat by the creek under the stars. The water shimmered silver under the moonlight. I could almost hear my dad's voice. "You protect what's yours, son." Not with anger, but with truth. So that's what I planned to do. But truth doesn't mean much when the HOA's got lawyers, surveyors, and the county inspector on their side. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of engines, trucks, and construction equipment right by my fence. Karen stood with a rolled-up blueprint in hand, barking orders like a general. "We'll start dredging along this line," she said. "The HOA needs to ensure proper flow." I stormed out barefoot, adrenaline pumping. "You can't touch that creek." Karen turned, her voice dripping with arrogance. "We have authority under Section 3A of the Community Guidelines." "Section 3A doesn't overwrite deeded ownership," I shot back, but she just smiled. "Prove it." And that's when I knew this wasn't about water. It was about control. By sunset, the heavy equipment was idling at the edge of my land. I called the county office. They told me to resolve it civilly. I called a lawyer too expensive. I even called the HOA hotline, which went straight to voicemail. It felt like standing alone against a machine. That night, I sat in the dark, flipping through my father's old files, yellowed maps, faded land deeds, and one black and white photo of him standing beside that same creek. "Shovel in hand, smiling," I whispered. "Don't worry. Dad, I'm not letting them take this." The next morning, Karen came strutting back, this time with the county code inspector. She had the confidence of someone who thought she'd already won. "Mr. Daniels," she said, pretending to sound polite, "we're issuing a notice of encroachment. That dock needs to be dismantled immediately." I clenched my jaw. "That dock's staying," I said. Karen scoffed. "If you won't comply, the HOA will handle it. You'll be fined daily until it's removed." The inspector looked at me sympathetically but didn't say a word. As they walked away, Karen turned back with a grin. "You should have joined the board, Jack. You'd have had a say in things." That night, something inside me broke, not out of rage, but heartbreak. The sound of frogs croaking, the smell of wet earth, the gentle rush of the creek, all of it felt like it was slipping away. Like my father's legacy was being stolen in broad daylight, so I made a decision. I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning with my father's deed, the original survey map, and even a notarized statement from the neighbor whose land bordered mine. It took 6 hours and 3 different departments. But finally, the clerk looked up at me and said the words I'd been praying for, "Mr. Daniels, the creek's not HOA property. It's yours, privately deeded since 1957. I exhaled so hard my chest hurt. "Can I get that in writing?" She smiled. "Already printing." But when I returned home, I nearly dropped the papers. Karen and her crew were already tearing down the dock. Boards were floating in the creek like broken bones. I shouted her name so loud it echoed through the woods. Karen flinched, but crossed her arms. "Too late, Jack. The HOA approved removal." I held up the stamped deed. "Not anymore." She froze. For the first time, that smug grin cracked. "You're bluffing," she said. I handed her the papers. "Read it." Her face went pale. The county inspector, who happened to still be nearby, stepped forward and read it himself. His eyes widened. "Ma'am, he's right. This creek isn't under HOA jurisdiction." Karen stammered. "That can't be. We've already—" "Then you're trespassing," I said quietly. The board members looked at each other. The workers shut off their engines. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle rush of the water, the same creek my father once blessed with his hands. But Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. She straightened her sunglasses, her lips curling. "We'll appeal. You haven't seen the last of this, Mr. Daniels." Then she stormed off, leaving muddy footprints and shattered planks behind. That night, as I rebuilt part of the dock, my neighbor Hank came over. He was an old rancher, the kind who never meddled but always watched. He leaned on the fence and said, "Heard the ruckus. You handled yourself like a Daniels son," smiled faintly. "Thanks, Hank. But I've got a feeling this isn't over." He looked toward the road where the HOA signs gleamed under the moonlight. "Well," he said, "if they come again? I know a man who doesn't take kindly to bullies." "Who's that?" I asked. Hank smirked. "My cousin, county sheriff, and he still rides his patrol horse every morning." I didn't think much of it then, but that small piece of information would change everything. A few days later, when the HOA tried one last desperate move to seize my land for community access. And that's when the sheriff rode in on horseback and froze every single one of them in place. The next morning started with thunder, but not from the sky. Engines roared again by the creek. I looked out the window and felt my chest tighten. The HOA was back. This time, they weren't just carrying clipboards. They had a backhoe, orange safety vests, and 2 uniformed security guards standing by the fence line. Karen stood in front, shouting orders through a megaphone like she was directing a parade. "Start clearing the debris. This waterway is a community resource, not one man's backyard." I ran outside, clutching the deed I'd fought so hard to get stamped. "You can't do this, Karen." She didn't even look at me. "Already got approval from the county's environmental board?" "You're out of luck, Mr. Daniels." It stopped me cold. "Approval, how?" "I just confirmed ownership days ago." I pulled out my phone, called the county office. No answer. Called the inspector voicemail. It felt like déjà vu, me against their machine again. The workers started lowering the backhoe toward the creek bank. That sound, the rumble of the metal bucket, felt like thunder cracking open my heart. "Stop," I shouted. "You're trespassing on private property?" Karen turned slowly, that same icy smile back on her face. "Then call the cops, Jack." "Oh wait, the HOA is the law around here." For a second, I actually thought about it, calling 911, begging for help. But then I remembered what Hank had said the night before. My cousin, the sheriff. I grabbed my truck keys and tore down the gravel road toward Hank's ranch. The tires kicked up dust and gravel, my pulse pounding with every turn. When I got there, Hank was fixing a fence post, a hammer in one hand and a thermos in the other. "They're doing it again," I said, breathless. "Karen brought in machines." Hank looked up slowly, squinting at me under his hat. Then he sighed. Should have known that woman wouldn't stop. He reached for his phone and dialed a number without another word. "Hey, Sheriff." "Yeah, it's Hank. You remember that Daniels property by the old Pine Creek? HOA's crossing the line, literally." He paused, then smirked. "Yeah, bring the horse. You're going to want the town to see this one." By the time we got back, the HOA had already ripped half the dock apart again. Karen was directing the crew like a queen, giving orders to her peasants. I parked the truck and stepped out just as thunder rumbled. Real this time. Dark clouds rolling over the mountains. Karen's megaphone crackled. "Mr. Daniels, you're in violation of HOA obstruction policies. Leave the area immediately." I stood there unmoving. "This isn't your land," according to section. That's when everyone heard it. The sound of hoofs, slow, rhythmic, powerful. The kind of sound that made even the wind pause to listen. Out from the tree line came a tall chestnut horse, and on it, Sheriff Tom Reddick. He wasn't some fresh out of academy type. He was old school, silver badge, sun-worn skin, boots that had seen every back road in the county. Karen's jaw dropped. The workers froze mid-step. The sheriff rode straight up to the property line and stopped beside the backhoe. He looked down at the muddy mess, then at me, then finally at Karen. "What's all this?" he said, voice calm but heavy. Karen cleared her throat, trying to recover. "Sheriff, this is a community maintenance operation. We're within our legal rights." The sheriff raised one eyebrow. "Community maintenance, huh? Funny, because I just came from the county clerk's office." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a manila folder, the same deed I'd gotten stamped, complete with county seals and signatures. "This creek," he said, lifting it high, "belongs to Jack Daniels. Has since 1957. That means every shovel you stick in this dirt is an act of trespassing." You could have heard a pin drop. Karen tried to speak, but her voice cracked. That can't be right. We had authorization." The sheriff turned to me. "You got that authorization letter they're talking about?" I shook my head. "They never showed me anything." He faced her again. "Then you're lying to a county officer, Miss Karen? You want to make that official?" Karen's sunglasses slipped slightly down her nose. Her lips trembled. "This is harassment," she muttered. The sheriff dismounted, slow, deliberate, and walked right up to her. He was taller than I realized, his presence commanding but calm. "Ma'am," he said, "harassment is when someone digs up a man's family land and destroys his property. I suggest you stop before this becomes criminal." One of the board members whispered we should leave, but Karen wasn't ready to surrender. Her pride wouldn't let her. "You don't understand," she snapped. "This waterway affects the whole community. It's about environmental safety." The sheriff nodded. "Then you file a civil petition. You don't bring bulldozers. Now, pack it up." Her voice shook. "You don't have jurisdiction here?" That's when he slowly reached down to his belt, unlatched the radio, and said into it, "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Reddick. I'm at Pine Creek Subdivision. Possible trespassing and property damage in progress. Send to deputies and the county assessor." Karen's eyes widened. "Wait, you can't?" He cut her off. "Ma'am, I can. And I am." The workers started backing away. Some of them looked embarrassed. One even took off his hard hat and apologized to me quietly. Karen stood frozen in the mud as the rain started to fall. Not a drizzle, but a heavy cold downpour that drenched everything. The sheriff turned to me. "You all right, Jack?" I nodded. "I will be." He tipped his hat. "Good. I'll stay here till the deputies arrive." 15 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing red and blue across the wet grass. The entire neighborhood came out to watch. Neighbors whispered from porches. Kids pointed. People who'd once sided with Karen were now silent, clutching umbrellas. Watching their queen lose her crown, Deputy Mills approached the sheriff, nodded, and began taking statements. When Karen realized what was happening, she finally cracked. "You don't get it," she shouted. "We were protecting the neighborhood." The sheriff crossed his arms. "By destroying private property, it's about control, about keeping things uniform." He raised an eyebrow. "You just admitted it's about control." I think that's all we needed to hear. The deputies photographed the damage, the splintered dock, the torn-up bank, the machinery tracks cutting through the mud. One officer asked Karen to step aside for questioning. She tried to protest, but the crowd's silence made her realize how alone she was. Even her board members started stepping back, muttering things like, "We didn't sign off on this, and she told us it was approved." The sheriff turned to me quietly. "You want to press charges?" I hesitated. My father's voice echoed again in my head. "Protect what's yours, but don't lose your soul doing it." I looked at the wreckage. Then, at Karen, mascara streaked, shoulders shaking, rain dripping from her hair. "Not today," I said. "But I want her off my property for good." He nodded. "That we can do." By evening, the backhoe was gone, the crowd dispersed, and the rain had finally stopped. The creek ran muddy, but alive, like it was washing away the last traces of their arrogance. As I stood there watching the water flow, Sheriff Reddick came up beside me, holding his hat against his chest. "Your dad be proud, you know," he said. "Not many men fight this hard for something that doesn't have a price tag." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's not about money. It's about roots," he nodded. "That's what they don't get. Folks like Karen think land's just dirt and numbers. But to families like ours, it's memory." I smiled faintly. "Thank you, Sheriff." He swung up onto his horse, gave me one last nod, and said, "Keep an eye on your mailbox. Jack, my cousin's on the county board. I'll make sure the HOA gets what's cumin." Then he rode off down the muddy road, his horse's hooves echoing like thunder fading into calm. That night, I sat on the remains of the dock, the rain clouds clearing, the moon glowing through thin mist. Across the creek, I saw something move. Karen, standing under an umbrella, staring at the water. For a moment, I thought she'd come to apologize. But she just looked lost, defeated, and for the first time, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt sorry for her, because people like that, they spend their lives controlling others, trying to own everything around them. And in the end, they lose the only thing that matters: peace. I turned away and whispered, "It's over, Dad." But deep down, I knew it wasn't quite over yet. Because a few days later, a letter would arrive from the county office, one that would expose every illegal thing the HOA had done for years, and end their reign for good. The rain had stopped, but the town was still buzzing. Word spread faster than wildfire. Sheriff rode in on horseback and shut the HOA down. By sunrise, my phone was lighting up with calls. Neighbors who had once kept quiet now wanted to talk. Some apologized for not standing up earlier. Others shared stories of Karen's bullying, fines for garden gnomes, threats over mailbox colors, even banning veterans from hanging flags on porches. Seems I wasn't the only one she'd wronged. But that morning, as I poured my coffee and looked out over the creek, a plain white envelope sat on my porch. The county seal was stamped across the front. My gut twisted before I even opened it. Inside was a single-page letter that read, "Mr. Daniels. Following recent investigations into Pine Creek HOA operations, multiple violations have been discovered. Enclosed are findings from the County Compliance Division. Property seizures without due process, unauthorized collection of environmental maintenance fees, false zoning reports submitted under President Karen. Holt's named the HOAS charter has been suspended pending review. All affected residents are advised to attend the public hearing next Friday." At the bottom was a signature I recognized, Sheriff Tom Reddick. I couldn't help but laugh. Not out of joy, but relief. The kind that comes after months of holding your breath. They'd gone too far. It's gotten now it was catching up to them. I spent the next few days rebuilding my dock, plank by plank. Neighbors stopped by with sandwiches, old nails, and stories about how the HOA had terrorized them too. Old Mr. Riley from down the road said Karen once fined him $200 for painting his shutters too patriotic. Miss Alice, who'd lost her husband last year, said the HOA threatened to tow her car because it had a dent in the fender. Every tale was another crack in Karen's empire. By the time Friday rolled around, the community center parking lot was packed. Folks who never came to HOA meetings showed up. Lawn chairs, coffee thermoses, even one guy with a sign that read, "Our Creek. Our town, our rules." Inside, Karen sat at the front table, shoulders tense. Makeup perfect, but smile forced. The rest of the board looked nervous, eyes darting between her and the crowd. Then the sheriff walked in. No horse this time, but his presence was just as heavy. He carried a binder thick with papers and a folder marked evidence. The murmur in the room died down instantly. He placed the folder on the table and said, "Let's make this simple." Karen straightened, her voice sharp. "Sheriff, with all due respect, this is a community matter." "You have no," actually, he interrupted. "It's a criminal matter now." Gasps filled the room. He opened the binder, flipping through documents. "The HOA, under your direction, Ms. Holt, has been charging unlawful assessments, falsifying drainage maps, and seizing private land without consent." Karen's mouth fell open. "That's absurd." "We followed procedure." The sheriff lifted a photo, one I instantly recognized. It showed my torn-up dock, the heavy machinery. Karen standing right there giving orders. "This," he said, "isn't procedure. This is destruction of property. On private land." He set the photo down slowly. "And it's all backed by recorded witness statements, financial records, and a complaint list longer than a grocery receipt." Karen's voice cracked. "You can't pin this all on me." The board approved it, but her fellow board members didn't flinch. One of them, a man named Roger, stood up. "No, Karen, you bullied us into it. You told us you had legal clearance?" Karen spun toward him. "You agreed to it." He shook his head. "We trusted you." The sheriff folded his arms. Seems that trust was misplaced. The silence that followed was heavier than rain clouds. Then the county commissioner, an older woman with glasses hanging on a chain, stood up and read the verdict. Effective immediately, Pine Creek HOA is dissolved. All remaining funds will be returned to homeowners. Ms. Karen Holt is barred from serving in any community. Leadership role pending investigation. The room erupted. Applause, cheers, even a few tears. Karen just sat there, frozen. The sheriff handed her a formal notice. She tried to take it with shaking hands, but it slipped and hit the table with a loud slap outside. The sun had finally broken through after days of storms. Neighbors gathered around me, clapping me on the back. "You did it, Jack," one man said. "You stood up to her and won." But I shook my head. Wasn't just me. We all did. The sheriff, Hank, every one of you who spoke up. Ah! Across the lot, I saw Karen walking toward her car, sunglasses on, trying to hide the tears streaking her face. For a moment, I almost felt pity again. Almost. She paused halfway to her car, turned, and met my eyes. Then she whispered something I could read from her lips. "You ruined me." Ow. I didn't say anything back. I didn't have to, because the truth was, she'd ruined herself the moment she thought power was worth more than people. That weekend. The sheriff stopped by my property one last time. He was off duty, wearing jeans and a smile. "County's cleaning up the paperwork," he said. "You'll get official notice of full ownership rights reinstated next week." I nodded. "Appreciate it." He looked out over the water, the sun glinting off the ripples. "You know, my granddad used to say, water's got memory, flows where it's meant to, no matter how many dams people build." I smiled. "Guess that's true for people too," he chuckled. Swung up on his horse. Yeah, he'd brought it with him this time, and said, "Keep that creek running clear, Jack. Town needs men like you." Then he tipped his hat and rode off down the dirt path. Hooves echoing soft and steady, That night, I sat by the water again. The rebuilt dock creaked under my boots. Fireflies blinked across the bank, and the sound of the current was soft, steady, peaceful. I could almost see my dad there, sitting on the old stool with his fishing rod. That half smile under his mustache. I whispered we did it. Dad, the creek's ours again. A gust of wind rippled through the trees, and maybe it was just the breeze, but it felt like an answer. The next morning, I put up a small sign by the water's edge. It read, "Private Creek, established 1957, family land, family honor." A few days later, a young couple from down the road walked by and waved. "Looks beautiful, Mr. Daniels," they said. I smiled. Thanks. Just keeping a promise. And maybe that's what this story's really about. Not laws or property lines or HOA rules. It's about promises. The ones we make to our families, to our land, to the people who came before us, because some things like dignity, legacy, and peace can't be measured in square feet or bylaws. And as long as that creek keeps flowing, I'll know the fight was worth it. If you ever find yourself standing alone against something bigger, a board, a bully, or a system, remember, truth and persistence have deeper roots than any rulebook. Stand firm. Speak calm. Let justice flow, like water finding its way home.